It has been a minute since we've had a podcast episode, and I am so excited to bring you a podcast episode today. But I do want to take just a minute and mention a few things. So, number one, the podcast may no longer follow a routine schedule. I'm in a stage in my life where I just have a lot going on with kids who are involved in things and work and all that. So I am going to attempt to put out podcast episodes fairly regularly on a somewhat regular schedule, but it won't be like an every other Tuesday thing. And what would help me is if when I do post one, share the word, spread the word, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, let everyone know, and get everyone to come check it out. There are a few episodes that are exclusively available on YouTube right now that I am going to try and go back in and put into the regular podcast format. So if you haven't seen some of those episodes, those are the most recent episodes, and they've been a little while. My guest today is someone that I'm very excited to have, and I'm going to wait to introduce them until the next clip, but I want to encourage you guys to support them and support everything that they're doing. And yeah, I just am excited to be back. I hope you enjoy this podcast episode. Don't forget to go and follow me on YouTube as well, because I do a lot of stuff with my record collection on YouTube and occasionally some stuff with books that's separate. So thanks a lot, you guys. Well, it has been a minute since we've been here, and I'm happy to be back doing the podcast. Today, I have an exciting special guest to talk to, and that is somebody who's deeply involved in music. We're going to talk some about that, and now has an upcoming book about the Emo Revival. We are talking to Andrew Sachar. So, Andrew, how you doing today, man?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here, and I think I want to start out with a congratulations because you, from what I understand from our brief conversations, you got a new baby. Is that correct?
Yeah, the timing is crazy that my newborn was born like basically right in the middle of announcing the book and everything. Obviously unplanned because you can't possibly have planned for that kind of coincidence, and it's been a lot at once, but so much exciting stuff happening. Obviously, but we're over the moon about our son, and so excited for the book to come out. Really happy that people seem excited about the book. So yeah, it's a lot to be thankful for in 2026 for me.
That's awesome. And it's kind of like two births at once: the birth of a child and the birth of a book. That's exciting, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't want to make my wife, I like to joke like, oh, I've been pregnant with the book, but it's like, I don't want to be insensitive to actual pregnancy,
For sure.
but yeah, it does feel like these two births, so to speak.
Yeah, one is a physical birth and the other is an emotional. Yeah. So before we get into talking about the book, and I do want to talk about the book, I want to talk a little bit about your full-time job that you're doing as well, because you're an editor for Brooklyn Vegan, right?
That's correct.
And so tell me a little bit about that. How'd you get involved with that, and how long have you been there? And yeah, just tell me a little bit about that job.
Sure. I've been there 15 years and counting. I started writing for them in 2010, not full time at the beginning, and it just kind of clicked. Like me and the team there, like we felt we were really like minded. I felt like I grasped what they were doing really quickly. I feel like they were happy to have my contributions pretty early on, and then it just turned into a full time thing, and it's become a massive part of my life and identity. And I love my team so much, and I love the chance to get to write about pretty much whatever music I want to write about. If not for Dave at Brooklyn Vegan giving me the go ahead basically to talk about some of the bands my book's about back in like 2011, the book might not exist, because back then, and we can get into whatever you want to get into, but so I don't mean to derail the conversation on one question, but like back
No, you're great.
a theme of this sort of emo revival movement, which comes up in the book, is the sort of indie rock focused music press was like kind of famously hated emo. And so when these revival bands started taking emo back to its underground roots, like I saw it as really connected spiritually and musically to indie rock more so than like to kind of, I guess, like the pop punk stuff that the previous generation of emo was. So I was like, hey, this is actually related to what we talk about. It's just coming from a different place. But the end result musically, a lot of these bands are similar, you know? And so he really like trusted that I was onto something, and he was like, "That's cool. You can talk about that. Like, I'm not going to stop you." And you know, like I've spoken to other music writers who said that they faced some uphill battles at publications that didn't want to touch this stuff for a minute. So I feel really lucky to have been at a very open-minded publication that has let me talk about emo, has let me talk about ska, and a lot of other, you know, styles of music that might not have gotten away with at a similar type of place.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I am going to come right back to what you just said, but I want to talk about the ska thing for a minute, because
Sure.
I had never heard of Brooklyn Vegan, and perhaps would never have heard of Brooklyn Vegan, except for the fact that you guys are one of the few outlets that cover ska warmly, you know,
Hmm.
honestly, but also warmly. It's not a joke to you guys. And I think for a lot of people that are in the ska scene, one thing that gets very old is people just thinking ska's a joke, which
Hmm.
sort of coincidentally is true. You know, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between ska and emo, right?
Oh yeah,
That
for sure.
emo has it becomes a joke. Now we have, I think, in the ska scene, and even some of the people in the emo scene can have like a good natured, like, you know, can make fun of ourselves and make
Yes.
jokes about it. But it's nice to see someone that also like takes it seriously, is respectful, and will highlight like the quality music, you know. So I appreciate that. There's no question there. Just really, just a thank you that Brooklyn Vegan does that, and I love that you feel open to being able to do that.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, and I'll be honest, like, you know, it wasn't easy. You know, like I definitely second guessed, you know, the first time I really wrote like a lengthy ska article, I was like kind of like, are we doing this? You know, like it's
Yeah.
because emo may get hate, but ska gets way more. But you know, I felt like it was ridiculous that I couldn't. I said this during some other conversation at some point. I don't remember when, but like I had posted this Facebook status back in, I want to say 2014 or 15, and it was like, can someone give me like one good reason why Sky is so hated? And all the comments were not good reasons. You know, like all this stuff
Yeah.
was like it wasn't accurate. It was like these like incorrect stereotypes basically. And I was like, so no, the answer is no one can give me a good reason. Like it doesn't make any sense. And also, you know, when I sort of found out about the whole, like Bad Time Records and stuff, I'm sure
Yeah. Absolutely.
when I found out about that whole scene, it really felt exactly like when I found out about the sort of Top Shelf Records, Run for Cover Records, Emo Revival stuff like a decade earlier, where there was so many parallels, where it was just like the major music world was like, we don't care about this music, but all these bands and fans and people were like, well, this music actually means a lot to us on a very serious level. And it's like, and like in both cases, there would be some level of, oh, I like emo, but like not Fallout Boy, or like I like ska, but like not Real Big Fish, and I don't want to throw any band under the bus, but and even like those bands have redeeming qualities. So that's why, like, I'm not even trying to. I think those bands have done great things for both their genres. But there was this level of like defensiveness, kind of
Yeah.
like, okay, like I want to separate. Like you're stereotyping all of ska as like one Real Big Fish music video, like
Yeah.
so when I put Bad Time Records, and their whole scene was like, we have a whole scene across the entire country of people as DIY as possible, rooted in a love of music and a punk rock mentality, playing the music we love. And I was like, this is exactly what it felt like when I found like the Top Shelf, Run for Cover, Tiny Engines, Count Your Lucky Stars kind of stuff, where it was like same thing. Like these record labels were just formed by like, you know, other band members or other people who just believed in the same thing that pretty much the whole greater, bigger music world was seemingly not interested in. And so there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, when you told me that you've been writing for Brooklyn Vegan just now for 15 years, that's surprising, because I don't know how old you are, but you don't look like you've been able to do something for 15 years like that. Have you been writing since you were in high school, or a little bit out of it, or?
I started when I was in college.
Okay,
Yeah.
right on. Well, one of the things I was really interested in about your book, and one of the things that drew me to your book, is like, so I'm 44, right? I'm
Hmm.
44 years old. And for me, um, back in the day when I was really like a part of the scene, when I was young enough to be going to shows all the time and stuff like that, and um, one is a lot of the shows were multi-genre mixed bill shows. So you might have a ska band, an emo band, a punk band, a hardcore band. It's going to be a mix of things. But so the bands that I grew up in the scene with, and I definitely liked, and I think people, one of the things that did is it caused people to be open to a lot of types of music, you know. So like for me, when I think of like the emo scene, the bands that I grew up into are bands like Further Seems Forever, the Juliana Theory, you know, a little bit later, Emery, you know, a lot of the Christian emo scene from Tooth and Nail Records, because I kind of grew up in the Christian music scene, but also like Jimmy Eat World. And then like sort of in the background, there were bands like, you know, Sunny Day Real Estate that I knew had like come before. And sort of recently, one of the things I did this with ska. This is how the Rudie Librarian was born. Is I realized, one, I had missed out on a lot of ska back in the day because I was primarily in the Christian scene. But two is I found out that there was this whole ska scene that still existed that never went away and had grown that I wanted to get to know. Recently, I've been sort of taking a dive into emo. Because I realized same thing. There was a lot of emo that I missed back in the day. There's a lot of great emo right now. So I love the fact that you're really specifically covering the emo revival. What's challenging to me is when I start researching like emo, people can't seem to agree on like when the revival starts. You know, are there waves of emo or not? And then another thing that kind of makes it challenging, and I'm interested to hear kind of how you address this, is what is emo? Like what constitutes an emo band? Because I feel like with a lot of other genres, you can point to something specific. Like ska, if you don't have upstrokes, you're not ska, right?
Right.
You don't have to have horns. Catbite proves that, right? But if you
Right.
don't have upstrokes, you're not ska. So like, but emo seems to be much more broad. You have emo hip hop and a lot of genre mixing there. So can you talk a little bit to that and a little bit to like what you consider the timeline of emo and what it constitutes the emo revival?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like both of these questions are going to be like hotly contested until the end of time.
Sure.
It's, and it's like even like I have my general stance, but one, even my own opinion, I contradict. And then two, there are going to be people obviously who pick up the book and disagree with my timeline. That's fine. It is I think in weirdly it is subjective, even though something like a time period should feel objective. I think it's weirdly not. And then to your point, emo is extremely hard to define compared to a genre like ska, where it is literally what ska is defined by like actual musical traits, and emo is almost more like you know it when you hear it. And there, like you said, like because there are post-hardcore bands that are emo, and then there are post-hardcore bands that are not emo. There are pop punk bands that are emo, and there are pop punk bands that are not emo, so on and so forth.
Right.
So and then there's like like one of the bands in my book that I do focus heavily on is the Menzingers, who I would say are a punk band. I don't think the Menzingers are an emo band, but I also think that they are intrinsically tied to the scene the book is about. So they're there,
Yeah.
So there's things like that too, these sort of like gray area things of like, do I think the Menzingers are emo? No. But would I ever talk about emo revival as a movement and leave them out? Like, of course not. So I guess the best answer I've ever heard to what is emo, I asked most of the people I interviewed for the book what they thought. And Christian from the Hotelier, I'm going to butcher the quote, but they said something like, emo is like there's this threshold inside of you, and when the song crosses that threshold, that's emo. And that's like a kind of a reductive way of summing up what they said, but like it's how I remember it 3 years after doing the interview. It's like it's not word for word.
Sure.
But it landed and hit me really hard because I was like, yeah, no, that's what it is. Like when you go to a show and the band plays that song and you just like you get taken to a different level emotionally, like you just need to spill everything out of you, like that's emo. And I think that happens with, in my like band, to mention some of the bands in the book, that happens with the Wonder Years, who are pop punk, and Touche Amore, who are screamo or post-hardcore, and Title Fight, who are melodic hardcore, and it happens with Snowing, who are like the classic kind of cap and jazz style Midwest emo. So, you know, it's just like it's all across the board. But I do think that that kind of does some of it. That's the difference between, like, to go back to the emo era that you were talking about, like Thursday is a post-hardcore band that's also an emo band. And then like Unwound is a post-hardcore band that's not an emo band. And Thursday crossed that threshold. And that's like the best way I can put it.
Okay.
Um, but and that's not a diss, by the way. It's just different style of
No,
music.
I get
Yeah.
it.
I mean, Unwound are an incredible band, so it's just a different thing. But to the waves, the timeline thing, yeah, I mean, I think loosely first wave emo is like mid 80s Washington DC Discord records, you know, like Rites of Spring, Embrace, Dag Nasty. Second wave emo I think is like basically 94 to 99, like from Sunny Day Real Estate to American Football and everything in between. And then I think third wave emo, the really popular stuff, really begins with Jimmy Eat World releasing The Middle in '01, and then like Saves the Day, Thursday, Taking Back Sunday, that kind of stuff. And I think, you know, like it probably extends through, I like its peak popularity would be like probably up through about '07, when Paramore released Riot. I feel like maybe that's like the last massive third wave emo record. But there's still not that those bands broke up, and a lot of them had big records, so it's a loose timeline, and everything intersects too. You know, it's like it's not like every second wave emo band was broken up by the time. And Jimmy Eat World were a second wave emo band. See what I mean? It's all like,
Right.
but
Yeah.
The Middle is a third wave emo song, and Clarity is a second wave emo record. So I think my book says that fourth wave emo, which is Emo Revival, goes from 2008 to 2018. You know, some people might say it starts a little earlier. Some people might say it ends a little earlier. Some people might say it hasn't ended, and I would probably even say it hasn't ended. But there's a reason I have it end where it ends. The reason it starts in '08, I think, is pretty clear. I think that's really the first year that you get a really sizable push of underground emo bands that were specifically reviving the type of emo that was big, that was prominent in the '90s when emo was closer to indie rock, more underground, and kind of disappeared when emo got really popular in the 2000s and was closer to pop punk. There was a sizable amount of bands really making a push to bring that back in various ways. And they found each other and they were playing shows together. And you could go to a show and you could see this kind of emo and you could feel something was happening. So I think that's the beginning of fourth wave emo. And then to your point about mixed bills, in those early emo revival days, before there really was like a true emo revival scene, like you were sometimes lucky to see two of these bands on the same bill, because honestly, more often than not, like you like these bands would be on bills with screamo bands and metalcore bands, and like because it was like this, like for the really early emo revival bands, I feel like bookers were like, okay, well, I mean, I guess you're like a little bit too heavy to play with like pop punk bands, and that was kind of like the big thing at the time, like the neon pop punk era. So like, I guess we'll throw you on a bill with like a metalcore band, you know, like I guess you're closer to that because you have like mathy parts. So I guess maybe you're closer to that, and it would just be funny because you'd see like these bands that kind of sound like American Football or Cap and Jazz or Braid on these like hardcore shows because it was at least closer spiritually to hardcore than it was to pop punk. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's you know it all, and then within fourth wave emo, I'd say there's three waves within fourth wave emo. So it gets real nerdy. The deeper we want to go, the nerdier it gets. But that's I'll stop.
I'm both fascinated by all this, and it can be overwhelming. I know, like for me, it's been interesting. The more I've always been very passionate about music, always been a collector of music, and I would say I was always pretty open. But I would say up until I was like after I graduated high school, I was pretty anti-country and rap in any way. I was like, they're evil. But now I like everything and listen to everything. But sometimes I get a little like tripped up when I hear people start naming like all the different subgenres. Cause like I know for me back in the day, it was like it's punk, it's emo, it's hard, it's ska. And that was like most of the genres, maybe a little shoegaze, maybe a little indie, whatever. And now I hear so many like subgenres of things where people will be like, oh, and everything ends with the word core. And I'm like, wait, what is, I don't know what nightcore is. I don't, and so it can be. It makes me feel like I'm showing my age a little bit. Like the gray in the beard has lost me some of that knowledge. But I love hearing you kind of describe that. I definitely, as you were talking about it too, I was thinking about, as I've been organizing my vinyl collection, I'm a pretty big vinyl collector. There are so many bands in the emo scene where I'm like, oh, does this one go in punk, or is this emo, or is this something else? And then a lot of those bands too, talking about bands like Paramore, like, okay, as we go further in the collection, not as much emo or punk or anything like that, but I sort of keep all of an artist together. So,
Right.
and it feels weird to have, like After Laughter in the emo section, but it's fascinating to me, and I am finding so much cool stuff to learn about. As you were preparing for this book and doing a lot of the interviews, kind of what was the thing that was fueling you on? What was the thing that was driving you to continue? I know, like, there have been a couple times where I've been like, I'd like to write about something. I have a passion for it, but it's a daunting task to try and write something lengthy. And I think you can get in your own head and feel like, do I really have something new to say? What was the thing that was driving you and making you believe like this is something that needs to be put out?
Yeah, it's 100% daunting. And I hit a lot of lows and moments where I felt like, unfit. Like I was like, maybe I'm just not cut out to be an author kind of thing. And then I talked to other author friends. They're like, we all had the same feeling. I'm like, okay, well, that helps. Solidarity. But I think I feel like the story of the emo revival movement is an incredible story when it comes to just like music history stories. It's really unique. The combination of like sort of re-embracing the DIY values of like the SST Discord era with the benefits of the very early social media age, like having MySpace to meet a band that didn't live in your state, but it was still primitive by far compared to what social media is like now, where it seems like regional scenes, like there was still regional scenes still exist, but like the internet has made it so the biggest region is just the internet, but back then, like there was like a strong, okay, this is the Chicago scene, this is the Philly scene, like, so it was like there were still strong regional scenes in the classic sense, but there was this early social media era that was connecting them, and it was just like a really unique time. And just the concept, I think, of like if you don't know or care about any band in the book, just the concept that emo was really positioned by the mainstream to be a fad of the 2000s that had passed by the end of that decade. Like when the bands in my book started to come up, you know, the mainstream music world wasn't looking for this stuff. Like you had, this was the era when when major labels were dropping all their emo bands. You had like Thursday going back to an indie label, Thrice going back to an indie label, Taking Back Sunday going back to an indie label, all around the same time that these bands were starting to come up. Even Newfound Glory going back to an indie label, like it's just, that was the era where the mainstream was like, we're moving on from this. And so I think the story that these bands came up, they combined classic DIY ethos with burgeoning social media to embrace a genre of music that the mainstream was trying to phase out. I think that's a fascinating story, even if you don't like the music. So I was like, that's a story that should be told. And then on top of that, a lot of the history is, lost to the Wayback Machine, or just like, again, MySpace pages that don't exist anymore. And then if you go to the Wikipedias, for example, or the all music pages or whatever, for a lot of these bands, like if they exist, they're often pretty bare. So I was like, oh man, I feel like this kind of story it's like somewhat endangered. Like there's a risk that we'll forget about how important and special this was, because it's not so widely reported on, and sort of anchored in the stone of music history the way that like third wave emo has been. And of course, there's another great book on third wave emo coming out soon. I mean, I haven't read it, but the author is great. I assume it's going to be great. There's a book coming out on second wave emo soon. Like there's still so much story to be told, but I felt in comparison to the kind of My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, Jimmy Eat World era, that there were books on that stuff, and there was no book on this, and I didn't want it to get lost, so that kind of drove me. And I hope that there are more. I hope that this is the first. Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't want to say it's because like it maybe isn't the first, but I hope that it's. I hope that other books come out about this because I expect um there to be people who disagree with my view of things. And so I hope that there's like another competing view that I can read and be like, oh, you saw it that way. That's interesting. Like it's still history. I try to be objective, but every author is going to have their lens, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I know like for those of us who were, passionate about the ska scene, we got kind of 3 ska books almost all at the same time with,
Yeah.
we got Ska Boom and Hell of a Hat and In Defense of Ska, and they all did something different, and they were all really great books. And so for me, as someone who is super passionate about music, but also super passionate about books, I mean, I am in real life a school librarian, a public librarian, and on a library board. So libraries are what I do. But like having these wonderful books to tell the story is like a real gift. And so one of the things I'm excited about is having your book, for instance, next to Where Your Boys Tonight, because that's a great book about the emo scene kind of before what you're talking about, the earlier emo scene and the books that continue to come out. So I'm glad that you're contributing to this. And for me, as someone who missed a lot of this scene, it's going to be a real blessing for me to be able to go in and say, hey, these are the bands I should dive into some. And I can hear some of their story ahead of time. So I appreciate you putting in the work and dealing with those lows in order to keep pushing on and create the book. I want to ask you, you talked a little bit about like the sort of legacy bands going back down to indie labels and stuff like that. And now we also have like this big push with things like When We Were Young Fest, and you have like, one a website I really enjoy, but maybe other people might not feel the same way. But the why am I losing it right now? Matt Cutzel and Felt Emo Might Delete all of that stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know if it's not the Emo's Not Dead stuff,
It
is
is.
it?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
it is? Okay, yeah, yeah. Right. They have their cruise now, right? It's
Yeah. They
that
have.
same, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he started doing those Felt Emo Might Delete YouTube videos.
Right,
Um,
right.
and and then sort of created his own satirical emo band with Your Broken Heart or Your Broken Hero, and then the cruise. And like there's a lot of like poking fun at themselves, but they
Mhm.
also take themselves pretty seriously. Do you feel like those legacy things and the things that mostly are focused more on legacy acts, are they helpful to push forward the emo revival and even the emo bands that are past 2018, or do you think that they make it harder for people to dive into that?
Both. I think I went to When We Were Young last year. I had a really great time, and they booked a few bands from the new generation. But I think those kinds of festivals should book a lot more from the new generation. I think it would be I when you go see tens of thousands of people sing every word to Paramore and My Chemical Romance and Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy and all those bands, you're like, okay, there's a massive, massive audience that wants to go see this music live in 2025, 6, whatever, 4, So I'm like, you exist. Like, you want to see this stuff. And I have a good feeling, based on anecdotal evidence, that you are probably a little bit older now and not keeping up with music the way you were and not really seeking new stuff. And then you see people online asking, like, why aren't there new bands like this? And then it's like, oh, that stings because there are, and I bet you like them. Like it's like if you buy tickets every single time Blink-182 tours, but you don't really keep up with fifth wave emo, like I've got a lot of bands that you'd like, So
Yeah.
and so I do wish there was a bigger push for the sort of the biggest generation of emo now that it is having its sort of 20-year nostalgia cycle to include the 2 subsequent generations that didn't get as popular. But at the same time, I would argue, and sort of do in the epilogue of the book, that the emo revival community that this book is about really did pave the way for that nostalgia to like kind of be sustainable, because I think that the bands that my book is about help turn emo into its own subculture, just like punk and hardcore were. Like punk is not just a genre of music, punk is a culture, and then hardcore is another culture. And I think emo at this point is its own culture. I think when a teenager picks up a guitar and wants to learn how to play punk songs today, there's a better chance that they're learning how to play a modern baseball song than they are like a Black Flag song or something. Like it's like they're so I think that, or like a No Effect song, like that's like the punk of today's youth, I think, is probably more similar to emo than it is to like, SoCal skate punk.
Sure.
So I do think that even though like, a band like Modern Baseball or Algernon Cadwalder never got nearly as big as the big names on the When We Were Young lineup, I think that community of bands helps sustain interest in emo. And there are like, you can draw like, like 6 degrees of separation or whatever. Like Lil Peep was in a collective with a member of Tiger's Jaw, who are one of the main bands in my book. So it's like you can make the argument that Tiger's Jaw had like a direct impact on the biggest emo rapper, and then Lil Peep, then like without him, you would never have Machine Gun Kelly's pop punk record with Travis Barker, which was like, so popular and also like credited with revitalizing pop punk or even emo. And I'm like, okay, so like if you draw the lines, like you kind of can trace Machine Gun Kelly and Travis Barker having a massive hit song that was pop punk in the 2020s back to like this underground movement. Um, and then even if you Google, one of the other things that I felt like made me really interested in titling the book Emo Revival is if you Google Emo Revival, you'll get articles from like mainstream press, not music press, like Nylon and People and stuff, talking about how like Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish are ushering in an emo revival. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And it's like you're using the phrase that this scene was sort of coined, and it honestly feels like history repeats itself. It's kind of the same thing as when like Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance got popular and the radio was like, this is emo. And then there were people who were like, emo is Sunny Day Real Estate, like, and it's like, yeah, but it's the same concept. It's like you're pulling just enough of this underground movement and making it more palatable. And, it is the thing. It's just a more palatable version. And so like, is Olivia Rodrigo responsible for the longevity of emo? I think yes, in some ways. And I think that, like if you fall in love with her songs that are punky and you want more of them, the internet can help you find probably some of the bands that like were in the scene that my book's about. And I don't think that's crazy to say. And, or at least adjacent to it, like, so I do think it ultimately helps if people are hungry for this kind of music, then hopefully some of them find it. So.
Well, and your point about Olivia Rodrigo, once she was on the stage with, Robert Smith in Glastonbury, I think she's automatically inducted into the emo family. Once you've got your Cure, connection there. And your point too about like finding those bands later, like being like, does this music exist? That was one of those things for me. And I think like the first two bands that I was introduced to, which are actually a little later than what you're talking about, but last year's albums by Kerosene Heights and Saturdays at Your Place, both of those albums absolutely blew me away. And I was like, how did I not know this stuff is still happening? And so that's one of the things that made me dive back in. And so to see the breadth of all these bands that you're talking about, like literally your first chapter heading here, and I'm scrolling through because this book is not yet in physical form in front of me. But back to page one. Hold on, I'm almost there. But you start out by talking about like, you've got the Progress, Algernon. You're gonna have to say that name for me one more time. Algernon.
It's Algernon Cadwalder.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely one of those names that I was like, I'm gonna need that said a few times. The Wonder Years, and then you scroll down, you get a little bit further in, and you're talking about bands like you were just talking about, Tiger's Jaw and stuff like that. These are all bands that like really I missed, and there are a few bands that like maybe I've heard their name, I've heard Title Fight, I've heard of Tiger's Jaw, I've heard some of the Menzingers' music and really like it. Kind of to your point, are they really emo or just connected to the scene? Um, so it's really like this lovely gift to be able to, experience a lot more. And you talk a lot about specifically that sort of, well, you've mentioned it a couple times here, but and I know we've only got about 10 more minutes, so I don't want to take forever, but kind of going back into that indie DIY ethic to keep going. Um, I want you to maybe talk a little bit about, um, do you see, as we have now this like drawing out with maybe some of the bigger artists like Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish, do you think we're in danger of repeating ourselves where maybe they start being picked up more by other labels and that DIY coming away? Or do you think it's just so intrinsic now that it's just too linked to the scene?
Um, I mean, there already kind of has been like a few examples of major labels noticing this kind of stuff. I mean, actually, Tiger's Jaw had one album on a major label, and it didn't work out, as is sometimes the case for this kind of music. Um, but yeah, I think it's a very loaded question. I think times are different. Like now, as far as underground music getting picked up by the major label feeding frenzy, you're more likely for that to happen if you're a shoegaze band than an emo band, which is totally nuts. And I don't think anybody who liked shoegaze in the '90s would have ever predicted that.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't surprise me at all if major labels, maybe saw interest in a band like Kerosene Heights for Saturdays at Your Place. And it would also not surprise me if that never happened. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's the music industry is so different than it was in the 2000s when there was still all this money to throw at, you know, bands that were perceived as like, I guess, like, I mean, read Dan Ozzi's book Sellout.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
like that's like I think that era, like that sellout era, um, is mostly over for punk. But at the same time, you have Turnstile on a major label who are probably the biggest band that this scene has had in over a decade. And not nearly as big as the pop punk bands of the 2000s were, but things are happening for them that's pretty felt pretty unexpected when it started happening. So I think anything could happen.
And I saw them open for Blink 182, like you were talking about, and
Yeah.
Destroy Boys opened
Yeah.
the show. So, and I also would say kind of like what you were talking about, but the difference in time. Now there's such a push that like we don't need labels for almost anything. Maybe distribution, but a lot of bands are just doing it themselves. And I think also part of it, like the sense of like what you see with like Taylor Swift, you're seeing these older artists that have gone and fought and fought and fought to get their rights back. And I think that's sort of teaching a lot of younger bands like, hey, maybe we don't want to be a part of these labels that then like own you and own all your stuff. So that's
Yeah, for sure. And I think, on one hand, music's middle class is bigger than it ever has been. I think that's the best part about the sort of post Napster and now post streaming era is the 1% is just as small and impossible to infiltrate as ever. But the amount of artists that can play for 500, 1,000, 2,000 people a night is exponentially larger than it was before the internet. Um, but at the same time, the major label push is still, I think, pretty hard to replicate. Like, do Turnstile get to where they are if they don't have the major label behind them? Just because they're that good? I don't know. I mean, I don't think so, and I like that band a lot, and I believe in them. And then, I think there are a lot of great bands that, I think, if anything, a lot of the bands that are in my book, um, I think had the potential to be 5, 6, 7 times as popular as they were. And I do have to wonder, is that because of the industry ceiling when you just don't get the opportunities that you get when you have that major label behind you who can book you on Jimmy Fallon or Saturday Night Live or, the second biggest stage at Coachella and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time. I am so excited about this book. It comes out, and we want to give us the release date and some information there about it.
Yeah, September 8th on Clash Books, the same indie publisher as In Defense of Ska. Yeah, you can pre-order it now from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookstore. It's also at the Brooklyn Vegan Shop and some other like cool little shops. But yeah, if you're interested at all and you want to pre-order it, that means a lot to me. So thanks in advance.
It's coming out paperback. Are there any other? Is there going to be any other like audiobook, or I'm assuming there will be an ebook, but any other releases of it later?
Audiobook is TBD.
Okay. Right on. Cool to know. As a librarian, I just want to throw my note here at the end for anyone that scoffs at audiobooks. Audiobooks count as reading, very important and helpful for a lot of people. And then one question I like to ask, and this is not related to your book, but I always like to ask my guests, what is a book that you loved growing up? Like what's a book or even a book that you just have read recently that you really love that you would recommend to other people? Obviously, we're recommending your book. Go pre-order his book first. But then also this is just something you love.
I mean, I will say that when I was a kid, I read Andy Greenwald's book, Nothing Feels Good, which was about emo, like up through about 2003. And the fact that book, like put emo history in stone right when it was just first getting popular is so interesting to me because like at the like to look back on it and be like that book came out like before Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance released their big singles, but it felt so definitive at the time, and it's crazy how much it missed because it just like came out right in the middle of things. That was fascinating, and it also kind of gave me the confidence to some people said, isn't it too soon to write about like the 2010s, and I was like, well, Andy Greenwald wrote about the 2000s in the 2000s. So,
Right.
So I don't know, that book, it was formative for me, and it was, and that particular aspect of it was influential on me. So I guess that was a growing up one, since you asked.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna also throw out a recommendation as we're wrapping up here that those of you who go to Brooklyn Vegan to pre-order his book, and I really hope that a lot of you will do that. I also want to encourage you. I noticed when I was looking at the pre-order screen for your book that you guys also carry negatives by Amy Fisher McFadden. Her photography kind of, and she edited it. There's other people contributing, but that's a more of a nostalgic emo book, but definitely another one fun to pick up. So.
I went to one of the release events for that book, actually. It is super, super cool. I have a copy on my bookshelf over there. I mean, it's been, like you said about Scott, there's the Chris Payne's book you mentioned, Where Are Your Boys Tonight? Earlier, I like passing, but didn't name them, but Ian Cohen and Emma Garland are the authors that both have emo books coming out. So it does feel like we're in this little emo book gold rush. I mean, Dan Ozzi's Sellout is not just emo, but paved the way for so much of this stuff to enter the book world. So it feels like it's a good time for emo and punk rock, pop punk books.
Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time. For someone who just reached out, you don't necessarily know me from Adam. I appreciate you taking the time to sit and talk to me. There is so much more to talk about with his book, guys, and it comes out, like you said, in September. But I really encourage you guys to pre-order a copy. And man, I know even with what portion of it I've got here to read right now, I've got a deep dive into music that I'm excited about. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.